You've lost your mind.
We are talking Ghost Town. Now this is directed, written and stars Owen Conway. And there's a low budget supernatural horror western drama, I guess you would say. It focuses on a character called Solomon, played by Owen Conway, who is a drifter, kind of aimlessly wandering around the West, going from one place to another. And he comes across this kind of small, out-of-the-way town, and he's kind of looking for work and ends up getting a job in the local saloon, where he's kind of like the barman, ultimately. But it seems to be a somewhat deserted town, not many customers, and the people that are there do seem to be a little bit off-kilter, so to speak. You know, we've got the owner of the bar there, who seems to be quite strict one day, but kind of quite friendly another. A couple of prostitutes that seem to have differing kind of attitudes towards him, a number of other people, and there seems just to have this kind of weird vibe about it. And as the film goes on, we kind of learn a little bit more about maybe what's actually up with these people and the supernatural forces, including a strange growling that can be kind of heard outside, as well as kind of more spectral elements. Now, what will happen, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works with Ghost Town. So there have actually been a number of kind of horror movies called Ghost Town, so we are referring to the 2023 one. It's a low budget movie, and this is Conway's first time as director. He has worked as an actor a fair bit, but this is his first time as a feature director. But I've got to say, obviously it's always a little bit kind of concerning where you have an inexperienced director who certainly is wearing many hats. Writing, starring, producing. But I've got to say, I think he did a reasonable job here. I actually thought this movie was somewhat kind of well put together. There are a few problems which we'll come on to, but it kind of held my interest for the most part. And I think a lot of this is down to some choices that were made, which I feel are, not typical. Now, for one of these things, this is a Western which doesn't focus on outlaws. It doesn't focus on lawmen, it doesn't focus on gunslingers or anything like that. These are more of your kind of everyday folk that you see as supporting roles in any other Western. These are, the main character is a barman, the main female lead is a kind of a prostitute. Then we get other prostitutes, we get the saloon owner, and there is the local sheriff, but he doesn't have he's not the main character. So you have this kind of point of view from the kind of the more of the typically what would be supporting roles now thrust into the kind of the limelight. And as such, the dynamic is a little bit different because this isn't like a shoot 'em up kind of Western. It's much more of almost a slice of life, dealing with kind of like more kind of mundane things to a certain degree, like the local drunk, he keeps sleeping in the outhouse and things like that. But then we pepper in these kind of more supernatural elements to kind of make it seem weird and off kilter. But I actually quite like the idea here that we have these, a look at these kind of like these characters that are in this kind of Western town that aren't typically kind of highlighted, and it kind of gives you, I think, a different perspective and a different flavour of Western. And I actually quite like the fact that we are dealing with some, layers of kind of like the mundane kind of mixed with the kind of the supernatural. I thought that was pretty good. Now, as I mentioned, Conway has a few acting credits under his belt, and I have to say, I think the acting wasn't so bad. I actually thought the acting, it's a lower budget affair. I can't imagine they've had a huge, a massively long shooting schedule, and as such, I'm not pretending this movie is certainly Oscar worthy in regards to its acting. But I thought everyone here did a decent enough job in their roles. Again, I watch a lot of B movies, so I kind of am sort of used to this level of film, this budget that we kind of see in this one. But I gotta say, I was kind of like quite impressed with the kind of the acting. I thought everyone had the spirit of the characters that they were kind of inhabiting, and you know, they did a good enough job here to make them seem believable characters in their respective roles. I was also reasonably impressed here with things like the effects. We do get some kind of more overt kind of supernatural imagery, certainly in the kind of the latter half of the movie. And I have to say, I thought it did a decent enough job. Again, you know, we're keeping the budget in mind here. This isn't a kind of a, you know, this is an independently produced kind of low budget movie. But I thought they did a decent enough job, as did the kind of things like the kind of the, you know, the setting. There's kind of like this western town. And I think a lot of these tend to be shot in kind of like theme attractions and stuff, but it was okay. A lot of it is shot at night, which I think kind of like maybe, you know, helps with the kind of the experience of believability in regards to this kind of like this location setting. And I've got to say that it looked okay to me. And there is an interesting mystery, because it's kind of one of these movies where you're not quite sure what's kind of going on. And, you know, you're intrigued to kind of find out what's actually happening here, because we have these kind of flashes of kind of supernatural elements and hints at stuff that about maybe what it is, you know, and I won't say what, but it kind of goes on thinking, okay, I want to find out what's actually the deal here with this particular movie. And this is where we transition into what doesn't work, because I think this movie has bitten off a little bit more than it can chew in a narrative sense. Because I think this movie does set up quite an intriguing kind of suspense mystery about what is actually going on. You know, has Owen Conway's character, is he in purgatory or something along the lines of that? Is this town haunted? Are they ghosts? There's all these potential kind of like answers, and I don't feel it really sticks the landing. I think it buckles a little bit under its own weight, having lots of kind of like suspense and mystery and building up to it, but when it comes to actually giving us the answers, I feel narratively it falls down a little bit. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you the ending of the movie or what kind of happens, but to me, it didn't quite stick the landing. I didn't feel it really made a hell of a lot of sense. It ended up being a little bit convoluted in kind of story kind of elements there. So, you know, ultimately, I think the setup is pretty good, but it lacks a little bit in the kind of the final act. There's also certain elements that are introduced, and I don't want to spoil anything for you, but there are supernatural elements here that I feel are kind of like put in the movie, but then very little is done with them, and it's a shame. And I just feel like this would have benefited from having a second writer on it, perhaps, to kind of go over it. I often say this with low budget kind of indie films, and you know, the filmmakers, especially when they're like a one-man band like this instance, you know, they know the narrative, they know the story that they are wanting to put across, and to them it makes absolute sense. But the problem is when you're looking at it from an outside perspective, this unfortunately is where it starts to unravel, because obviously the people that are involved in making this film know the story they are supposed to be telling and what it's supposed to come across as. But when you're watching it cold, you're thinking, huh? I'm not quite getting it. So there are elements of that. I do feel some people will think this movie is a little slow for them as well, because ultimately, as I've mentioned, I actually like the fact that we don't have more of the kind of the typical action kind of Western characters like gunslingers, outlaws, lawmen, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, you know, it's not the most dynamic of movies in regards to action set pieces or anything like that. So although I quite liked that sort of change of pace, I will say I do think this movie may have been a little bit kind of slow for some. We do see a distinct lack of locations. For example, we have this saloon, and we see the kind of like the bar, and then we see like a bedroom, and that's kind of it. So it's obviously there's obviously a noticeable lack of shooting locations. The locations that we do see, I think, are actually reasonably done. But you'll notice that it always seems to be the same kind of camera angles, the same sort of backgrounds that you'll see. You'll never have like a transition about like someone going up the stairs or anything like that. It's just like, oh, we come to the bar, and then we come to one of the kind of the prostitutes' bedrooms, always kind of in the same, broadly the kind of the same shot. And obviously that's kind of to hide the fact that this is probably shot in somewhere where you know, you couldn't realistically portray the time in this other sequences and things like that. But it is a little bit noticeable, I have to say, in fairness. The movie also just has a little bit of a low budget feel. Again, if you're watching this channel, I'm assuming that you're probably not adverse to B movies. That's pretty much our bread and butter here. But for general audiences, I think maybe the budget here will be a little bit noticeable. So how to rate this movie? Now, I have to be honest, I was kind of leaning towards a 6 out of 10 for a long time. But I was a little bit disappointed with the ending here. I can kind of see what they wanted to do, but I have to say I think it really was a little bit convoluted for its own good and didn't really make a hell of a lot of sense, to be honest with you. And we also have quite an extended kind of epilogue, which I don't know if was necessary. So I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. So it's kind of like an average kind of style film. It's certainly not a bad film, but I don't feel it's going to be, you know, on anyone's top 10 movies of the year or anything like that. So maybe worth a watch if you like a little bit of a kind of a supernatural horror, as long as you don't mind a slower movie, a more character-driven movie. And there are elements that they do well, and that's, I think, this movie's biggest strength. But unfortunately, its narrative, although it starts off well, unfortunately, it's possibly its weakest element. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more in regards to the script on this one. So yeah, 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.